Welcome to the Aquarium. Great to have you here this evening. First, I want to thank our sponsor, the Gazette newspapers, for making this series possible. We have made a practice of bringing to you outstanding scholars and outstanding writers of science. Tonight we bring you both. They're all in one package. Peter Ward is an outstanding scholar with major contributions in a number of fields, and he is equally distinguished for his work in bringing science to the public. He has written more than 140 scholarly articles, 15 books, the latest of which is The Flooded Earth. And while we'll be here tonight listening to the story of this book, it will have its premiere on the National Geographic Channel. Now, Val, don't go home and watch. You stay right here. Okay. And among those 15 books, I haven't read all of them. I've read most of them. The Medea Hypothesis, I think, is one of the most provocative of these. Will you say a few words about this one tonight? All right, good. So he's won many awards for his films. He got his bachelor's and master's degree from the University of Washington, PhD from McMaster University. After that, he was going to take a year off after his PhD and be a ski bum, but it got interrupted by an offer to join the faculty at Ohio State. He went there for 2 years. He couldn't stand the Midwest. Now, that's where I was born and raised, Peter, in Michigan. So as long as we rooted against your football team, so. Yeah, right. And after Ohio State, he went to UC Davis, and he was there for 6 years or so, and then moved to the University of Washington, and he's been there ever since. Quite a remarkable career to be so outstanding in the not only on the scholarship, but on the side of bringing science to the public, because that is not an activity that is celebrated by your scholarly colleagues in universities. And last year, though, the University of Washington bestowed the highest honor that it bestows on a member of their own faculty. And it was so that he gave the lecture to all of the faculty on his views. And one of those is the strong need that we have to enhance science literacy in this nation. And he is willing to do it not only in books and in TV programs, but video games, almost anything that will capture the attention of young people. And over dinner, we have found a number of things that we intend to collaborate on. And I wanted to get the name of many awards. In 2003, he was awarded the Jim Shea Medal for Popular Science Writing by the National Association of Geoscience Teachers, which is its highest annual award. Previous recipients were Stephen Jay Gould, John McPhee, Bob Ballard, and Jack Horner. And you can see that this is a remarkable person who is with us this evening, and he was being filmed by the History Channel over much of the afternoon. And please join me in welcoming Professor Peter Ward.
Thank you so much. I absolutely have no idea who he was talking about, but what we'll do tonight, I hope, is have some fun. But on the other side, there's just a part of talking about sea level rise and the effects of global warming that is no fun at all. And you get to a point where we have to realize that it is a really oncoming problem. So what I'd like to do tonight is talk a bit about Antarctica, because much of what I understand about sea level rise and my thoughts about it are coming from Antarctica. I never went down there to study sea level rise per se. What I do in my day job is I'm an invertebrate paleontologist. I'm trying to study the effects and the aftermath of mass extinction. Why were there mass extinctions? Could there be mass extinctions again? The one that, of course, intrigues all of us the most, where are those bloody dinosaurs anyway? So it's that dinosaur killing extinction that took us down there. We have one of these so-called KT boundary sites, the boundary between the Cretaceous and the Tertiary, where the dinosaur extinction took place time-wise. If you are lucky enough to get animals, it's going to be a fairly narrow window in your entire cosmic appearance as a planet. So what's happened in the last 500 million years, that age of animals in terms of catastrophes. And going back to the theme of this talk, that change is the norm, well, so too is the level of animal life and plant life on the planet. This is a famous diagram from the great Jack Sepkowski. Jack put together this idea of what is diversity of life through time. So in this graph, we start out at 600 billion years ago, and we see that great big rise. This is the fabulous Cambrian explosion, when animal life diversified in this fairly short period of time. Of course, now I need to step back and say, short period of time, 50 million years. It's just, we're so warped, we geologists, by this, like, the immensity of it all. In a short period of 50 million years, all that big run-up happens, and then we have this pretty much steady state. But then we start seeing crashes. You see this great big one here at 250 million years ago, and a second one at 200 million years ago. Life doesn't come to a halt, but life certainly gets slowed down. You remove 90% of the species on the planet 250 million years ago. There are 5 such enormous mass extinctions, and afterwards, the world is different. The animals are different, the plants are different, everything works differently. These great events are perhaps the greatest biological change that's visible, at least in the rock record. So these things have been, since 1980, almost all blamed on asteroid impact. We know that certainly there are lots of nasty things out in space, and there have been huge impacts coming and going. But here we show perhaps the coolest victim of this greatest mass extinction of all time of 250 million years ago. This is a Gorgonopsia, a gorgon. This would be something between a Komodo dragon that was mated by some mad geneticist with a big hairy lion. You've got this big lizard sprawling thing with scales, and you had a lion-like head, a big lion-like teeth, and about 12 feet long. Big, top carnivore of the Permian world. This, however, is also one of our relatives. There's been no movie made about gorgons, as there has about lots and lots of dinosaurs. And in fact, the entire age of proto-mammals, or mammal-like reptiles, has never been represented in popular culture at all. And yet this was the world before dinosaurs. Tens of millions of years before any dinosaurs existed at all, this gigantic mammal fauna lived on this planet. And it was wiped out with this enormous mass extinction. The age of dinosaurs was a complete mistake. It should never have happened. It would never have happened, but for these mass extinctions. So what did it? Again, the answer has been over and over, asteroids from space. And we know this must be the case because Hollywood has told us. We had 2 blockbuster movies, Deep Impact and Armageddon. Bruce Willis saving us from Down It Comes. Asteroids are dangerous. Asteroids indeed caused the great death of the dinosaurs, but they have been way oversold, and the work that we do is trying to show that of all the big mass extinctions, only one has been caused by impact. So if not impact, what did cause the end of the age of proto-mammals? What delayed the rise of the mammals as we know it by 165 million year detour that we call the age of dinosaurs? And the answer seems to be climate change. We can map, and I'm sorry about the complexity of this, but we can go through this. Here's time on the left side, 500. And that blue line is mapping our best known estimate of what carbon dioxide was in the atmosphere over time. The scale up above is in parts per million, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000. At the very top near 0, you see where we are today, 390 parts per million. So if you go back through time, carbon dioxide has almost always been higher than it is now. In fact, the end of the age of animals is probably going to be caused by too little carbon dioxide. That seems so ironic when we worry every day now about CO2, you see it in the press. Too little carbon dioxide is going to cause the death of plant life. But that's way off in the future. But what we do know, that times of high carbon dioxide, higher than 1,000 parts per million, have led to mass extinctions. These are the many mass extinctions that have happened in the last 500 million years, including some of the big ones. Only one of these events was caused by impact. All the rest, sudden rise in CO2. So this leads us to a place where we can track the record of carbon dioxide over the last 100 to 200,000 years. But it's also composed of rocks much deeper, where we can also get a record of carbon dioxide and its effect on life. So I was lucky enough 3 years ago to take the first of 3 trips down to Antarctica. This fellow here is Eric Steig, who was with me on the first trip. Eric is the ice sedimentologist who has shown for the first time 2 years ago that Antarctica, along with the other 6 other continents, has been warming. So on this trip, we decided to go down and study the end of the age of dinosaurs down through here, and thinking this would just be a really straightforward paleontological trip, dig up the fossils, and lots of other things occurred. But one of the first things that you find out when you go to Antarctica is that Antarctica is heavily leveraged by international treaty. And one aspect of that treaty, and I'm sorry if I delve into indelicacy here, is that you're not allowed to leave any of your waste behind. They never tell you this, that when you go to Antarctica, you've got to have your own little bag. And since we were camping for 40 days, you end up with your bags outside your tent, and everybody has a little pyramid starting to build up. But the good thing about it is the whole world's a freezer. Everything freezes. We didn't have to have a fridge. We keep all our goodies outside. It's wonderful to live in the very cold. But on the other hand, it can be really awful at the same time. There's this beautiful stark beauty to this place, and at least to me, there's fabulous stuff to be found. This is my friend Joe Kirschfink from Caltech, and this is me, and we have half of the biggest ammonite ever found from Antarctica here. This is a Cretaceous sea creature. The chambered nautilus is the closest living creature, but the beauty of this, you can sort of see that golden orb. So beautifully was this preserved that the outer shell had its original pearly luster. And just like a pearly nautilus, we have giant pearly ammonites down there. So it's really spectacular. But the other good thing is, because that shell is so well preserved, we can take it and we can do chemical analyses from the shell itself. And we can detect what the temperature was at which it grew, what the carbon dioxide levels were around it, and we can even get back to oxygen levels that were present at that time. So life in Antarctica, fossil hunting in Antarctica, again, is living in a tent, getting up, spending about 12 to 13 to 14-hour days because it's daylight forever. You're down at pretty much in the southern hemisphere in the summertime down there. We're in December and January and February. And then working. This is a Argentinian collaborator who is helping us do this particular work in all 3 years. Lots of fun. And the biggest problem to dealing with your work down there is the snow. Snow covers the rocks. Rocks covered do not yield fossils. Snow keeps you in camp. And it's so cold you can't use computers. And the second thing I learned, in addition to processing all my waste and storing it up in front of me, was what do you do when you have too much time on your hands? How long can you read? Let's say it never gets dark. You're in a tent. You can sleep how many hours a day? You're still left with 12, 15 hours of stuff to do. So you read for a while. It is really hard to go through time in a snowstorm when you are trapped in a tent. And this can happen in 3 or 4 or 5 days. And I don't think you ever really get to know yourself until you're with yourself with nothing to take your mind off yourself except yourself for a long period of time. Snowstorming was a routine thing. Our camps, this is our little eating tent in through here. And down here you see a bicycle that my friend from Caltech took. Now I have to say that Caltech people are among my favorite on the planet. I hope there's no one in here that I'm going to disparage. But my Caltech collaborator said, what we really need in Antarctica are mountain bikes. I said, well, yeah, there are mountains there, but Joe, what about the snow? He said, well, I've got something. So what you can't see, because it's covered by snow, is he went out and had this bike fitted with studded tires. So we've got a mountain bike with studded tires that was dragged all the way across the ship and the airplanes and all the stuff to Antarctica. And we got it on the snow. And my friend got on it and said, see, this really works. And he went about, 10, 15 yards for the whole thing went over sideways, and he sprained his ankle. So there we go. So actually, when we headed off, because of treaty, we couldn't leave it there, but we threw it over the side as soon as we left port. So this is our first moonrise. On our first trip there, we were there fairly late in the season. This is the first time that we've gotten to see the moon in a great long time. These are Scott tents. This is where you live in Antarctica. It always bothered me that we were sleeping in a tent named after a man who died in a tent. There you are. So we're in this tent that he designed that he died in. I said, could we call it? No, it's a Scott tent. All right, let's go back to mass extinctions to think about sea level change and how Antarctica relates to all this. Because sea level change and Antarctica are intimately tied together. Here we are looking at 140 million years. And I put this slide to show what sea level has been doing for the last 140 million years. And it's been going up and down and up and down and up and down. But if you see from 120 to 100 to 80 to 60, it's way higher than it is now. I mean, way, way, way higher. And the reason for that, in those worlds, there was no ice anywhere. We call these greenhouse worlds. Carbon dioxide was 1,000 to 3,000 parts per million. That's a greenhouse effect so profound, you can't have Antarctic covered with ice. It's impossible. And yet over time now, why do we start seeing carbon dioxide dropping? Well, we go back to this Medea hypothesis. Medea hypothesis was just, I was brought up in some of the Greek tales, and Medea was the worst mother ever. And I picked that name to counteract the Gaia hypothesis. Gaia is the Greek good mother, and Medea is that terrible Jason's wife who murdered her children. Jason was a very bad man, it turned out. Bad captain, bad husband. He got the fleece, but he drove his wife crazy. And the reason I picked that is that life seems to be its own worst enemy times two. This drop in carbon dioxide, this long-term drop, seems to be mediated by life itself. Where has the carbon dioxide gone? It's tied up in the continents. Carbon dioxide is used to make what? Limestone. And what is limestone? Coral reefs, seashells, coccoliths, chalk. All that stuff is lime that takes carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, puts it in a rock, stashes it on the continents, and it's taken out of the carbon cycle. Over time, we've been pulling the CO2, we, life, and putting it in rocks where it's no longer accessible. That's the end of animals on this planet. Life will have driven carbon dioxide down to 10 parts per million in a billion years. And then you can no longer have photosynthesis. Your plants go out 22 million years after your last plant, your oxygen drops to 1%. That's the end of all the animals. So life seems to be its own worst enemy. Although since I published this as the Medea Hypothesis, a colleague of mine said, well, you know, I don't think that Medea is a good name. Life seems to be such a blundering fool. Why don't you call it the Mr. Bean Hypothesis? So we're going to rename the book the Bean Effect or something. Why does sea level go up and down? Two reasons. Ice is one, but the second comes from much slower processes. We have at the bottom of our oceans this crust of basalt, this magma. It's solid except in the very middle where we have these mid-ocean ridges. And right in the center of these oceans, at least in the Atlantic, heat is coming up. Heat does what? It causes the ocean bottom to expand upward. The hotter it gets, the more that ocean bottom rises. And as it rises, it pushes water out of the basin onto the continents. This causes sea level to rise. If you turn down the heat, if you reduce the heat affecting the bottom of the oceans, those rises slowly sink. The volume of the ocean increases, and water flows off the continents. Well, this is a really nice, slow way to raise sea level up and down, but there's a way faster way. And that way is by taking ice in this middle picture and melting it. Rapid ice melt causes sea level to go up. If, on the other hand, you have a really cold world, you pull seawater and turn it into ice on land, and you change the volume that way. Floating ice won't do this. All this pack ice we see in the Arctic going away or coming back, no effect on sea level directly, although it has a big indirect effect, as I'll show. All right, where was sea level in the past? I mean, this is the critical question. This is what we wanted to know in Antarctica. What was sea level back then? We want to know it now. We want to know where it's been in the near and far future. All right, look where it was the last glacial maximum 20,000 years ago. Sea level was 150 meters lower than it is today. You imagine how much more real estate there was. New Guinea, you could walk from New Guinea all the way to Australia. You had huge areas of the planet you could simply walk across that are now covered with ocean. And then if we go back to 3 million years ago, sea level was much higher than today. And in fact, even 100,000 years ago, there's an area south of Miami. There's a key down there where you can find Monastery, a big coral 10 feet above sea level. So we know that only 100,000 years ago, sea level was at least 10 feet higher than it is today. So it's been going up, it's been going down. And the question is, how rapidly can that happen? Well, the reason that sea level's been going up and down recently goes back to our old friend carbon dioxide. CO2 itself is a very effective greenhouse gas. As we get more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, the Earth traps more heat. It doesn't escape out into space. And we certainly know now from very good records in Hawaii on the right and pre-Hawaiian observatory records on the left there, that we're finding not only a rise in CO2, but rather what we call an asymptotic curve. Sea level is going up 2 parts per million per year now, increasing. And we see the way that curve is increasing. This is human caused. This is all since the Industrial Revolution. You could say, yes, there's a lot of natural parts leading to CO2 from volcanoes, lots of other ways, but this rapid succession and rapid rise is human caused. What is the effect of it? Our work in Antarctica was up on the peninsula and through here, way up at the tip, where we find a lot of really ancient rocks, the Cretaceous rocks we work on. But this is a picture from the cover of Nature that was published, in fact, in the February of our first trip. Its author, Eric Steid, was on our trip. He lived in the tent next to me. On the way back, we received word that Nature had published this, and as we were about to dock, after 5 days across the Drake Passage, in a very slow NSF ship, Eric got the happy news that he'd been denounced on the Senate floor by the senior senator from Oklahoma and declared that he'd faked the results. So my friend Eric has read into the Senate record for having faked the picture, photoshopped it, they said. The news is that the continents are warming. So I said that it doesn't affect anything if the ice in the Arctic melts. In fact, it would make things better. We could get goods processed by going around the Northwest Passage. But what happens when you melt that ice? What happens to the heat budget of the planet? When sun hits ocean, the ocean absorbs a lot of the heat. When sun hits white ice, that heat's bounced back into space. As we reduce the size of the pack here, we are changing from heat reflecting to heat absorbing, causing it to get a little bit warmer. As it gets a little bit warmer, a little more ice melts, causing it to get a little bit warmer. This is a positive feedback. As it gets a bit warmer, ice ever farther north that hadn't melted the last year begins to melt the next year. That's why these things are so dangerous. They start a life of their own. But again, all that stuff can melt. It's not going to have any effect on us. But all you have to do is go over to the right to Greenland. And secondly, the most important of all, to Antarctica, where you don't have floating ice, you have ice sheets. Ice sheets are ice on continents. And that is the controller of sea level, and that is really going to be the controller of the fate of human civilization over the next millennium if rises in sea level are as disastrous to civilization as I think they could be. So here's here's Greenland, and a heat map now showing where Greenland is raising temperature the most rapidly. All the southern glaciers are receding with great rapidity. Here's an example of this. One of the big glaciers, and the scale here is about 1.5 miles, and you're looking at the lobes of a particular glacier, where it was and where it is now. So this thing is retreating. It used to be sitting here, the ocean's off to my left, and now it has been retreating back and back into the highlands. So these glaciers are disappearing with great rapidity. The reason for that rapidity seems to be related to this. Now, I showed you a CO2 graph over the last 100 years. Here's one now that goes back for the last 1,000 years. And this is now a now famous graph called the hockey stick. The hockey stick is simply, you've got a long straight. It's random and it bounces up and bounces down, but it's fairly constant through time till you come to the 1800s or so, and then things shoot rapidly upward. And so we're looking now at temperature change on our planet over time coming up to the industrial civilization. We find a huge rise in carbon dioxide. At the same time, we find a huge rise in temperature. This is not a coincidence. So this comes to sea level itself. And let's think about some of the estimates of where it is, where it's going to be, because again, there are enormous societal importance and implications from this. It's hard to figure out what the future is going to be. It's hard when you're using models that rely on so many different variables. So what are those variables? How much heat is hitting the Earth? How much ice is there? How fast is that ice changing? How much is melting over a given time? All of these are factors. How fast is the ocean expanding simply from heat and not from water going in? Getting some reliable estimate is not easy, and that's why every one of these models, if they have any sort of validity at all, isn't going to be one point. It's going to be a range. And so here now we see the ranges that have been put forward by Stefan Ramsdorf, I think one of the best people out there. He is in Germany. And so we're looking here now at the ranges that he sees by the year 2100. And so 2100 is pretty much a date that you hear most of the estimates for. And he's looking now, this is 1 meter, so here we have 3 feet. So the Ramsdorf is suggesting that we're looking at somewhere about just under 3 feet to just over 3 feet. It's actually a little over 2 feet to about 4 feet. But his best model is coming in right about 3 feet. The thing is that when you look at these curves, it's like the curves that are taking place in the CO2. It's not a straight line. It's an asymptotic curve. It rises faster. You don't stop at 2100. It keeps going. And it keeps going. And it keeps going. Because of this positive feedback system. So many of the estimates and so many of the pronouncements about sea level I see goes to 2100 as if that's the end of things. Probably nobody in this room is going to be around in 2100, so why should we care? But all of us have relatives and relatives yet to be born that will very much care about this. And in fact, the effects of this are going to happen way before 2100. So we have things like the ocean, which has different response times to dealing with various aspects. The ocean is complicated. Some of the rise of sea level that the ocean is going to do is coming from its expansion rather than the melting that's going on. But nevertheless, we're looking now at what we think temperature is going to be doing. And if we have anything close to this, if we have anything close to a 5 to 6 to 8 degree Fahrenheit by 2050, then we can very much expect a world that is going into an unbelievable rapidity of global change. It was a little shocking this year to see those tornadoes, wasn't it? I mean, that's out of my experience. The flooding that's going on, things are just starting to accelerate. This is not random stuff taking place. We're starting to see what happens when you start raising temperatures into this type of system. All right, let's look at impacts and what could happen. Let's look at that 3-foot sea level rise. Well, here we've got the 4-foot level that Ramsdorf is talking about. And if there's any place more endangered on the planet than Bangladesh, I'm not sure where it would be, unless there's some of the Pacific Islands. Bangladesh is a population of about 110 to 120 million people. It is about the size of the state of Illinois. It feeds itself because it is in a wonderful tropical area and because it is really growing on this enormous ancient delta, the richest soil on the planet. It has 3 crops per year. The Bangladeshis are very good at rotating their crops. The soil is being fertilized. They are feeding themselves. However, did anybody see the most recent estimate on population of the Earth? That's now we're looking at 9 billion people to 11 billion people. After we were hoping it was going to slow down. I heard someone in the first row talking about that. Bangladesh is not going to be able to feed itself fairly soon. And that's assuming that sea level doesn't rise. But with a 4-foot sea level rise, Bangladesh is going to be really hurt. Well, sea level rise is so slow, you think that's crazy. How could sea level rise hurt anybody in Bangladesh? I mean, a snail could race faster than that sea level is going to rise year by year. But it's not where you live. It's not the fact that you're covering over habitation. It's the croplands. The problem with sea level rise is vertical and horizontal happen on very different scales. You can raise a foot of sea level, but it turns out that the lateral incursion of salt could be hundreds of feet. This is the problem in the San Joaquin Valley right now. You've got slight raises in sea level, and yet salinization of the Great San Joaquin is taking place because of salt infusion. That's their problem. Slight sea level rise, and they are no longer able to feed themselves. And this, to me, this area, this is the single most important area because the water affecting them is being fought over by Pakistan, Bangladesh, India, and China. They're all going after the same Himalayan water. And that water is going to meet changes when snow happens and when rain happens, as well as rising sea level and an intersection that's going to be problematic. So we can go into sort of many aspects of this. I just want to show a few. It's clear. But coastal ecosystems obviously are the greatest problems. The U.S. government is now buying up the Everglades, spending millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars to buy the Everglades. Don't do it. You know what happens to the Everglades with a 3-foot sea level rise? Take all that freshwater plant-loving plants and then put salt water in it. You ever pour salt water in your houseplants? The Everglades is just going to be a black, ugly swamp until the mangroves take over. Sea level is going to kill it all. South Florida is just in for a very salty future. So what we have to start thinking about is triage, intelligently thinking about triage. We can't stop the 3-foot, 4-foot sea level rise. Everything that's going to affect, you say, look, that's gone. What do we save next? And that's the attitude we have to take. Most big cities are on the coastlines. Cities are going to have to deal with it, and they have dealt with it in many different ways, but not many of them are dealing with it effectively enough. San Francisco, I've noticed, actually has a very good sense of what's going on. They have a commission that's working on it. I'm less familiar with what's happening down here in LA. I know what Seattle's doing, which is nothing. Cities are approaching this on an ad hoc city-by-city basis. There isn't any national agency that's trying to coordinate, at least for America. Where people will be impacted in California depends on where you are, but this is a map showing vulnerable populations based on sea level rise and big storm surge. So these are the population areas that would be most affected by a 3-foot sea level rise, coupled with intense and more intense storm frequency. And I seem to find this great big round one here called Orange County. So this is among the most endangered places in California by far because of the very low altitude that you guys have. I told you this would be fun. I'm so cheerful. All right, what can we do, and what else is going to be a problem? Let's go to the Bay Area, because the Bay Area has one of the most ingenious solutions ever, which is complete nonsense, but still, you got to love it for the hoots pop. Here's what happens to the Bay Area if we have a rise of a few feet. Actually, I think this is 5 feet on this map. These are all the areas that are going to go away. And my favorite one, who hasn't landed on San Francisco Airport? Isn't that cool? You come down, and then look at the water. It's right there. A 3-foot sea level rise, and that whole airport goes away. It's underwater. Now, Seattle just built a new runway at our airport. It cost $2 billion for one runway. How much would it cost to replace all of SFO, which they'll have to do? There you start seeing the insidious side of sea level rise. Money. How mundane was it? Who could have thought that a few deadbeats not paying their mortgages would cause the whole world to go to this 2007 to 2009 depression? What's it going to do to the world if you have to replace every coastal airport, every coastal highway, every set of wharves, because when the sea goes up, your ship can't dock anymore, etc., etc., etc. The poster child for what's about to happen from this is the Netherlands, which is now paying 20% of their gross national product on dam building, dike building, and water mitigation to their coastline. What's San Francisco going to have to pay to keep this safe? Now, here's the way you could fix it. You know some way to fix this? There's an easy solution here. Damn it. Damn it. Let's build a great big dam right under the Golden Gate Bridge. And then all the sea level can go up wherever it wants. And the heck with it. We've saved the Bay Area. We've saved Sacramento. None of it happens. And if you think that's nonsensical, that's actually one of the plans. One of the only ways that they can see to save the whole thing is to cut that off. And if you think that's crazy, there's an even bigger plan, quite serious, it's already been looked at, on damming the Mediterranean. Right under Gibraltar, you're going to build a wall 21 miles long and dam it up, and the entire Mediterranean is saved. Oh, this is crazy. This is crackpot. This could never happen. Except when you go back to the sea level curves, if you raise sea level 10 feet, you really have radically affected California, because a 10-foot sea level rise and a great deal of the Sacramento Valley and a great deal of the San Joaquin Valley is no longer arable. These are, as we know in this room, these are economic drivers of the state. Southern Florida, this is the poster child for kiss your butt goodbye, because they are as bad off or worse off than anybody. And again, this is a place which is not really worrying too much about it. One of the biggest hazards they are thinking about is they're just realizing now how many toxic waste dumps are located within a 3-foot sea level rise in southern Florida. And commissions are now trying to do something about that. A 1-meter sea level rise, again, does this. And this is why I'm saying that the Everglades is cooked, because this is just 3 feet now. And that entire Everglades area gets salted out. And it will be lost. Six meters, well, that's way off. But 6 meters makes Florida have a very, very different set of statistics. 6 meters say, yeah, that's way off, but at the rate things are going, in fact, that could be 2,300. So we've got a lot of land to lose in Florida. Here we have in the Miami region where the hospitals, where the sewage treatment plants, water treatment plants, airports, but all of these things are, again, endangered, and there will have to be major decisions, even with a 3-foot rise, on what to do about this and who's going to pay for it. So I want to conclude and talk about what's going to happen, what's not going to happen, and what should be done about it. Well, what's going to happen is change. I started out this talk saying things are changing. They're going to change. The sea level rise of 3 feet is inevitable. We can't stop that. We can't stop after that. But we can't stop the 3. We're going to have to just deal with this. We start planning now. What is it that has to be left and lost, like the Everglades? You don't want to emotionally, but you have to, versus what can be saved and should be saved. And so triage is what we're going to be looking at culturally, economically, scientifically, socially, triage based on this 3-foot sea level rise. I really do think this is going to shape humanity in a way that's totally almost unforeseeable at the present time, but it will. So doing nothing is not what we should be doing. Antarctica is showing the fastest global warming of all. If we melt all of Greenland, we have a 20-foot sea level rise. If we melt Antarctica, we have a 140-foot sea level rise. Our work in Antarctica started looking about what killed dinosaurs, but it's now working on what was the carbon dioxide then, and what was sea level doing, and most important of all, was there any ice at all in a world where we have 1,000 parts per million CO2? In fact, there may have been some slight evidence that you could have at least some ice with 1,000 parts per million. 1,000 parts per million, if at the current rate, is going to be honest, in 200 years. If we go back to the geological record, 1,000 parts per million has always been the trigger for these mass extinctions. But nevertheless, there's a possibility we could hit it and go back down and perhaps save some semblance, because the opposite is 140-foot sea level rise, and then all your books as they are probably useless. So I'd like to finish finally what an 8 to 10-foot sea level rise does to Marina del Rey. This is an artist's conception of how, if you have a boat, that you could really find a lot of different places to dock that you can't now. And I think with that, I'll finish. Thank you.
Peter, thank you. We have some time for questions or comments.
Yeah, I've got as much time as you have.
Who would like to? And we also have his books available for signing. And those of you who come from Orange County should particularly buy this book.
Or get galoshes.
Okay. Who has the first? Yes, Gary.
How do we get more coral to take this CO2 out of the air and turn this around? In other words, what caused the drops in CO2?
Yeah, the drops in CO2 and the rise in CO2 are probably related back to, there's a lot of really interesting stuff going on with orbital mechanics, Milankovitch, but taking charcoal, we don't want to deal with the coral, but if we take charcoal in huge industrial quantities and bury it, that drops CO2 down really fast. I mean, that works spectacularly well. There's a number of char products, charcoal, a number of ways that you can do this. You can seed the ocean to cause more phytoplankton, to pull more CO2. There's lots of stuff you can do. No one thing's going to fix it. The thing you can't do is what Nobel Prize winner Paul Crutzen advocates, seeding the atmosphere with sulfur particles. He wants to take every airplane out there, 747s, and drop sulfur dust into the atmosphere, which would cause sunlight to bounce back in space, and there goes global warming. In fact, it would probably tip us into a glaciation. But what it would do, you've heard about oceanic acidification. This would cause sulfuric acid to be hit in the ocean in such quantity that it would dissolve the backs off anybody that thought they would have a calcium carbonate skeleton. This is insanity. And yet he said, well, it's like, I've just got a Nobel Prize. You can say any damn thing or another, and people take you seriously. There are ways to geoengineer and ways not to. That's the way not to. But the way to is just what you're saying. Let's convince organisms to build more coral. The trouble is the acid in the water convinces organisms not to build coral. So you've got to deal with this. But these biological solutions are the way to go.
So you said doing nothing is not a good strategy. Wouldn't the best strategy be to start by stop doing stupid things, like encouraging people to build near the ocean, or spending $100 million to save salt marshes in San Francisco Bay when they're not going to be there?
Yes. There's lots of stupid things to be doing. Actually, on the way down here, I read the Bill Gates interview in Wired magazine. What has just happened in Japan has put the nuclear power industry back so far. Gates is making the point that, bad as that was, he thinks he can produce new generation nuclear plants that are safe. And I'm just scratching this. Why? The reason we had that terrible disaster there, the Japanese had no place to put their waste. We don't have a repository in this country. Yucca Mountain has been shut down. We in Hanford, or Washington State, where I live, we have all this waste product. Where are we going to put it? You can't open new nuke plants until you solve the waste problem. You solve that, you should really look at it. But we're nowhere near doing that right now.
Who has that? Yes.
What are some things that individuals can do that, on a smaller, manageable, personal scale?
So if people didn't hear, what are things individuals can do?
That's the single most common question I get. It's the single most important question. First of all, anybody eat hamburgers here? I do. Right? Here's an analogy. I love a good hamburger. I don't know if you eat hamburgers or not. I've tried to imagine how big a room would it be to take every hamburger I've ever eaten, bring it back to life. Would it be as big as this auditorium? Would it be 10 of these auditoriums? Is Peter simply a piece of walking hamburger. It would be a lot. Each of us has an enormous effect on the environment. We're big. We eat a whole lot. We drink a lot. We breathe a lot. It's unbelievable how much every one of us does. Conversely, what any one of us can do to change any aspect of our life that affects those gases in, gases out, liquids in, liquids out, consumables, is huge as well. See, that's what I hate. People say, I'm just one person, I'm powerless. When you start to see the fingerprint, the thumbprint that you have on this planet, you're hugely powerful and have a huge influence. The number one thing we can do, if you ask me, is bring back zero population growth. Where'd that go? In the 70s, that was a powerful organization. I'll tell you where it went. I actually studied this. The Bush administration killed it. They took away all their tax money. They just crushed them. World population control under the Bushies was destroyed. It isn't part of the equation anymore. Why don't we talk about this? There's too many of us. Stop having so many babies. That's the number one thing the world needs to do. The only way you're going to do that is raise standard of living for everybody. You empower women. You have energy. You have the ability to not have so many kids. World standard of living has to go up. But how do you do that with a small energy footprint? That's the thing. We have to increase standard of living, reduce the energy that we're using now. There is no such thing as clean coal. It's the worst oxymoron on the planet. We have to stop using coal. Just stop it. But it's the cheapest energy on the planet. So we need solutions, technological solutions, to make stuff that uses little energy. This monster, sucking energy down. These lights, every aspect here. We've got to get to high standard of living at low energy outputs. I think that's the only way we can do it, and it's going to take huge brain power to do that. But the second thing is we do have some time. We're going to have big problems, but a 3-foot sea level rise is not a 20-foot sea level rise. We've got some centuries to actually get this in order before it goes completely runaway.
Who has the next one? Al, go ahead.
You had a map showing the areas that were going to be most impacted by the rise. And I'm curious that you had some areas that were actually inland. You showed something that looked to be like the city of Los Angeles, which is not exactly on the coasted south as Orange County coastline is. How are you thinking that that's going to be impacted so far inland?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of ways that impacts, and that particular map was dealing with sea level rise, but secondly also coastal flooding. And what's happening now with global climate change is that snow levels keep changing. So the Sierras, for instance, where you used to get snow in the winter only, and then in the spring you got runoff. Well, now you're getting rain in the winter, and you're getting runoff all winter long. So we don't have snowpack in the spring for crops, but you're also now getting these winter floods taking place at a time when the storms on the coast are the worst. This is what's killing the Dutch. The Dutch, it's not just sea level. They've got these rivers going right through them. When they have a flood that hits an onshore storm, that's what's nailing you. Venice was just hit by the worst flooding they've had. It wasn't the sea, it was the rivers. Because the Alps now, they aren't high enough, and so they're not getting the snow they used to. So it rains all the time, and the winter rains are now flooding at a time when you don't have this one runoff in the spring where you could control it. It's being totally different. And so part of that was dealing with what river systems are doing with the lack of snow. It's just the winter, we are having the worst flooding in my state we've ever had. And we have the biggest snowpack we've ever had. So I see these people saying, wow, we had all that snow in the east. See, that's global cooling. No. When you have a warm planet, more ocean moisture goes in the atmosphere. There's more wet up there to snow out. And we're seeing the effects of this too.
As I recall in the Copenhagen diagnosis, it said that if we don't make major reductions in emissions of CO2 in the next 20 to 30 years, then we will go well beyond 3 feet. Am I remembering that correctly?
But the thing about that is that nobody knows for sure. And see, this is the blessing and the curse. It's the curse because deniers can say, you can't be sure. Well, no, we can't be sure. I mean, as you know, as a scientist, it's your best guess of what's going to happen, but it's not to say it's going to happen. But when we go back in deep time like I do, and when you see that sea level can change 15 feet in 100 years, we're not talking 3 feet, we're talking 15 feet in 100 years, then you know what it's capable of. The greatest single disaster that could befall us is the disintegration of the West Antarctic ice sheet. We now know it happened 1 million years ago. This is the ice sheet is below sea level. The whole thing comes off as a sheet and floats out to sea where it melts. This would be a 10-foot sea level rise in 10 years. See, there's no way society could deal with that.
We've got one over here first.
You showed a graph with all the extinctions. I'm wondering if you can speak to the biodiversity that bounced back from not each of those, but how biodiversity responded to maybe some of the most major extinctions.
Yeah, great question, because what the mass extinction people showed is that, in fact, you make up what was like the stock market. And we just had this crash, and it finally works itself back, and then it goes even higher. And the stock market graph is very much like this diversity graph. But the stock market and diversity can't go up forever. There's going to be some point in planet Earth history where you get as many as you're going to get. But I used to debate Frank Drake when I wrote Rare Earth, and I got the SETI people who just hated me. I mean, I had my wanted poster up at all the astronomy meetings, and at all the science fiction conventions. I actually had somebody say, "You took our aliens away from us." So I got in trouble that way. Frank Drake said, "Well, they're a good thing. Look, diversity went up higher after the extinctions than before. Maybe we should have more mass extinctions. We'll get even better diversity." I said, "Well, that's a good thing, except after the Permian extinction, you had to wait 5 million years before you got anything to evolve more complicated than a worm. So there's a long desert lag periods after these extinctions. Personally, I think we can do without them. We've had enough.
We had a very interesting talk this afternoon from Gretchen Hoffman from UC Santa Barbara about pH and coral reefs and so on. And we could lose most of our coral reefs within 100 years,
Yeah.
and it would take hundreds of thousands to millions of years to ever be able to get them back again.
Yes, and worse than that, someone already said we need more corals. What happens if you take the coral reefs and they're not sucking all that CO2 out of the atmosphere anymore? See, there's this double whammy on this deal.
I'm fascinated by this idea of diking over the Golden Gate Bridge. I lived in the Bay Area for about 30 years. I had never heard that proposed before. According to this plan, what keeps the bay from filling up from water flowing in through rivers? I mean, it keeps the ocean out, but
Yeah, well,
it also holds the fresh water in.
You could put a turbine there.
So you're running pumps to...
You're doing pumps in all different directions. The big Mediterranean deal, as sea level goes up and up and up, you can start running water through it into the Mediterranean. Because the Mediterranean will, if you turn off water going into the Mediterranean, there's so much evaporation, it evaporates down to the salt brine mess. So you, like the Bay Area, the same thing. You cut that off, evaporation is going to lower it. Because our rivers themselves, and obviously we've taken so much of that river water, you'd have to balance it. And you could do that, you could work it out, but it'd be a pretty nasty, gooey thing.
Cool.
Well, there you go. It's on the show tonight, actually, at the end of the show, and I haven't even seen this program yet. I worked on it last year, but we did an animated feature on damming the Mediterranean. And I mean, it's kind of cool because you would think if sea level goes up 50 feet, the only place left is the old ancient Mediterranean cultures. You know, they kept our sea level now, and everybody else gets flooded out. It's the cradle of civilization again.
Another question. I think you said that the best way to stow away carbon dioxide was by burying charcoal.
That's one of the ways.
Which seems very specific. Isn't any kind of biomass going to soak up CO2? I mean, it sounds like what you're saying is actually creating wood and putting it away as a process rather than doing it naturally.
For a reason I don't know, and I'm not a physicist, I just have read that charcoal, weight for weight, pound for pound, burying charcoal is the single best way using that particular method, but there's lots of them. Look, a really simple way, paint every roof in America white. This would have an enormous effect on the albedo. If every roof on the planet were painted white, you would change things radically. This isn't that hard to do.
You know, the idea of damming off San Francisco Bay is really a very old one. It had been made many, many decades ago to make it into a freshwater reservoir. And
But I guess the point I'm trying to make and didn't very well. I'm sorry I spent so many hours with TV people. My brain is kind of hash. That will do it. TV people do that to you. These are just such radical things to do. This is equivalent to you've got a cold, so therefore I'm going to cut off your nose and your leg for some reason. We can do things a lot simpler by not letting it get to the point where we have to do that. We have it in our power to stop this madness by reducing emissions. What has to be brought to the people is how serious it is. You know, we have cancer. We can fix it, but if we don't, we will die. It's not as if we don't have cancer. We have cancer. We have a drug for it. Get on your bicycle. But if we don't do anything, you're going to die. I mean, that's the point we're at.
Any other questions or comments? I want to, okay, right back here.
I'm probably loud enough
All right, go ahead.
without the microphone. I just, on the recovery of biodiversity after mass extinction, why is it that you get higher biodiversity following that, right? I mean, they say we have the highest biodiversity of any time in the past now, right, despite these past extinctions. What is it? What is the mechanism by which?
Yeah, well, let's think about, here's a really good way to explain that. If we go back to the Permian before this first big mass extinction, your land plants are really primitive, and they don't live everywhere. In fact, they live only in really narrow spots. You don't have tall forest trees like we do today. You don't have lots of stuff. You don't have saltwater plants. You have all that stuff. So you've got a really smaller amount of biomass on the land, and biomass going into the ocean has a big effect on this. So evolution starts causing the ability of life to live in more and greater and just lots more places. And the whole resource of the planet rises. I mean, you get more absolute biomass, keeps going up and up and up and up. There's more resources. And more resources, there's more different ways to go eat that resource. Now we've got 10 different plants. You've got to have 15 different herbivores specialized on eating those 10 plants. Species go up. So evolution has been driving this big diversification by modernization.
So basically increased specialization?
Increased specialization has probably the biggest single thing to do with it. But it's not just specialization, it's also increased ability to live in places where nobody could before. You know, I can now live, nobody ever could do that before. Now I've got that, biomass goes up.
It's interesting in the marine environment whenever you do a dredging and disposal project. We used to be very concerned that you were going to destroy the life. Actually, the productivity goes up, the diversity grows
sure.
up.
You're fertilizing the place.
You're causing a disturbance. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, can I just ask for
Sure. Well, I got all night. Give me a beer, I'll have 2 days here.
But I think the interesting thing is, right, if you think about these mass extinctions, right, you're going to have a huge crash in genetic diversity as well, right? So you have this increased specialization despite a huge crash in genetic diversity, right, which should be the fuel for the specialization.
Yeah, but genetic diversity comes back quickly. And one of the quickest ways, Hox genes. You know, Hox genes can really quickly, this is a really specialized system of regulation, but Hox genes multiply, they go, just like arthropods get more and more limbs, they can just reproduce, and you can build it back really fast. Because I don't think you ever lose all that. I mean, you might lose 9 out of 10 families, but that one family has still got all the innovations you needed. Diversity goes down, but does genetic diversity really go down? So I don't think anybody knows. It'd be a great experiment. I don't think anybody knows. It's how much do you save versus how much new has to come back. What's exciting is that there never has been a new phylum since the Cambrian that we can tell. Why didn't a 90% extinction at the end of the Permian cause new phyla to appear? And it didn't. So no one quite knows that. We don't know, maybe the genome gets hardened to the point that it can't really do radical new things. It's got so junked up over time, we don't know. This is really pretty cool things to think about.
So genetic diversity wouldn't decline in proportion to species.
Exactly. But how many mass extinctions is optimal? We had 5 big ones. If we'd had 10, what would diversity on the planet be? If we'd had 1, what would it be? I do know that if we didn't have Jupiter, I'll stop a minute, but these big impacts cause mass extinctions. We know that. What if the impact rate was 10,000 times higher than it is now? There would not, you would never get above the simplest complexity. You just wouldn't. And yet, if we didn't have Jupiter, that's what it would be. George Weather will show that Jupiter is sucking up all the impactors. So this is why we wrote Rare Earth. There's a number of staggering things you need to get and keep animals. It's pretty crazy.
So I highly recommend the book. I want to pick up on the word complexity, and it's quite remarkable, I think, what you've seen this evening. And when you have a real scholar like Peter, who swims in all of the complexity and is able to find the simplicity that if you weren't that research scholar, you wouldn't find it. And that's what is so important to events like this, books, TV programs that you do. And we really look forward to having a collaboration with you, because we are committed.
I'd love to do it.
We are committed to trying to bring these big stories to the public in forms that they can understand, but they have to be based on the very best thinking. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.